Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series Wednesday workshop on graduate school and your lived experiences. My name is Dr. Jane Indorf, and I'm the Assistant Director of Programs with the Leadership Alliance. Thank you to all of our students for submitting so many great questions ahead of today's session. We won't get to all of them per usual, but we will get to a good number of them. For those of you who are joining us live, feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat to ask questions during today's session. We'll do our best to answer those. And please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from, as well as your major. We love to know who's with us today. All right. So when we think about what it takes to thrive as a graduate student, which I was a very long time ago, the conversation usually revolves around standard academic and intellectual stuff like taking courses, mastering complex methodologies, surviving long hours in the library or the lab, or keeping up with literature in your discipline. But today, we're here to talk about a critical asset that actually sustains a scholar through the highs and lows of a PhD, your resilience and your lived experience. When we enter academic spaces, there may be a subtle pressure to leave our personal histories at the door, to conform to the traditional idea of how a scholar should be. But today we're here to challenge that. Being a successful graduate student and a future research leader isn't about blending into an academic mold. It's about recognizing that your unique perspective is your ultimate advantage, competitive advantage. Your lived experience are the very things that shape your perspective as a scholar and fuel your potential as a research leader. We're going to have a real unfiltered conversation about how to navigate the culture of higher ed authentically, how to advocate for yourself, and how to own your unique story as your greatest intellectual asset. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce our three graduate student speakers here with us today, all of whom are Leadership Alliance Summer Research Program alumni. Lewis Nunez Severino is a second-year PhD candidate in the Neuroscience Graduate Program at Brown University in the lab of Dr. Carolina Haas-Koffler. His research aims to identify novel therapeutic targets for the treatment of alcohol and other substance use disorders using neuroimaging and biomarker analyses. He received his bachelor's degree in psychology from Hunter College of the City University of New York. Welcome, Lewis.
Thank you.
Imani Porter is a genetics PhD candidate in the gut microbiome lab of Dr. Ami Bhatt at Stanford University. She is originally from the suburbs of Chicago and graduated from Hampton University in May of 2023, where she received her BS in biochemistry and minor in leadership studies. Welcome, Imani.
Hi.
Caleb Strickland is a PhD candidate in sociology at Emory University, where he got his master's degree in 2026. He received his BA in sociology from Morehouse College and is both a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow and an alumnus of Leadership Alliance SR-EIP, having participated at Columbia University in 2022. Caleb studies how race, identity, culture, and meaning making organize everyday social life. All right, so let's get started. We'll jump right into it with each panelist giving us a little more detail about their academic journey. And you can include or focus on how you got interested in research, how you first got involved in research, and I guess how you became interested in your particular research field. Lewis, do you want to get us started, please?
Yeah, of course. I, like many, didn't think that I would end up pursuing graduate school or research as a career, partially because I didn't know that it was a career that I could pursue. So I did my undergraduate in the City University of New York. I started in psychology doing an associate's in community college. Then I transferred to Hunter. Part of why I transferred to Hunter is because I was interested in pursuing neuroscience to whether that was like in neuropsychology or going into med school. I was still undecided. But something that Hunter had that attracted me was a research program called BP Indoor. It's a fellowship that is funded by the Blueprint initiative of the NIH to support training of um, trainees in neuroscience who want to pursue research in undergrad. I transferred to Hunter and I got accepted into BP Indoor, and they paired me with a lab that I worked in for 3 years before grad school. And it sort of became like a part of my life, and I pursuing research as like a job in undergrad let me know that I could pursue this full time as a career, that I should consider doing grad school and get my PhD. So through BP Indoor, I did two summer programs. One of them was at the University of Michigan, and then the other one was at Brown, where I did the Leadership Alliance in 2023. Through those experiences, I did different, like, I went into different fields of neuroscience. So in my lab at Hunter, I did behavioral neuroscience. At Michigan, I did cellular pharmacology. And here at Brown, I did human cognition using fMRI. And going through all of those experiences kind of like cemented my interest in understanding the neural and body systems that are affected in with environmental things like substance use, with the goal of hopefully finding better treatments. Um, I applied to Brown for my PhD because I did my leadership alliance here. I really liked the community here, and I wanted to come back. And luckily, I got in, and now I'm here, ending my second year.
Thank you so much, Lewis. Okay, Imani, would you tell us a bit about your academic pathway, how you got into research and in your particular field?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of ended up where I started and I'll explain a little bit. I feel like I was interested in research or just in science in general from a young age. And so like my parents had put me in different like programs just to be like, oh, she likes science. Let's put her in science stuff. And when I got into high school, I was in this program called AXO. And so they, or at least my chapter, it's a nationwide thing, but they have chapters all throughout the country. And the chapter that I was in, they partnered with Argonne National Lab, where we pretty much got a mentor and we worked on a project from October to March. And we just kind of did whatever interested us and overlapped with whoever our mentor was. And so that kind of introduced me to actually doing scientific projects. Like my first one was I was studying the gut microbiome in dogs and seeing how the grain-free versus grain-filled food changed or like affected the gut composition of these dogs. And so that was almost like my first clinical trial, or not clinical trial, but clinical study in a way where I was like looking for participants and like literally asking neighbors for dog poop. So that was like what got me really interested in gut microbiome, but research as a whole. And so I participated in that program all 4 years of high school. And then when I got into undergrad, I had gotten more of an interest in genetics because I took a genetics class in actually my junior year of high school. So then I was like, oh, I think I want to study this when I get into undergrad. Because Hampton University didn't have a genetics program, I majored in biochemistry because they kind of give you more of an in-depth understanding of biology, more so than I thought just like biology was, or at least that was my thinking. And so during undergrad, I did summer research programs. The first one I got was SSRP, or not, oh yeah, it was SSRP at Stanford. And then the following summer, before my senior year, I did the SHIRT program, the Stanford, or not the Stanford, the summer honors research program at Harvard. And so both of those experiences were kind of fundamental in me kind of gaining more experience in developing my computational skills and then also more wet lab when I did the Harvard internship. And that was where I got introduced to Leadership Alliance. And so that kind of helped equip me. And then I applied for grad school right after my senior year and I got into Stanford. I wasn't expecting to get into Stanford. And I am in a lab now where I'm back in the gut microbiome and I study the gut microbiome of those with Parkinson's disease since they have a lot of gastrointestinal problems. And so we're studying the different bacterial dynamics within that environment that contribute to disease. And so that's what I'm doing now, and I'm excited to be here today. So
That's so cool. Thank you. And to have that opportunity as a first year student in high school that's amazing. I can see how that would definitely solidify your interest in research with all that experience.
yeah.
Okay, so Caleb, who is representing the non-STEM people that we have out there, would you tell us a bit about your academic pathway and how you got interested in research, and your specific topic or discipline?
Yeah, so when I first came to college, when I first came to Morehouse, I actually didn't know what sociology even was. I'm from a pretty big city in Arkansas, but compared to the rest of the country, that's like a pretty rural area. And so like that wasn't a discipline I'd ever heard of. I came to college thinking I was going to be poli-sci and then become a lawyer. I figured, that's what you do. If you don't do science and then you're not that great at math, you just go become a lawyer and you'll talk. But then my first year, I took a sociology class, and the professor had us do research projects. My group focused on differences in Black maternal health outcomes for Black women of high income and middle income and low income in Atlanta proper. And so that really was very interesting to me. And after that, I switched my major, but I wasn't really sure how you could make a career out of that. I didn't know about research at the time. And so I was speaking to my advisor, who was the chair of the department, and she told me that if I was interested in no longer going to law school and wanted to do sociology full time, I would need to get a PhD. She said, to do that, you're going to need research experience. So she forced me, even though I was very resistant, to apply to the Mellon Mays undergraduate fellowship program. And during that, I got to do my own research problem. And that was mostly oriented around gentrification in Atlanta. I lived in Atlanta right near the start of the pandemic, through the pandemic, and then for many years after. I still live here going to Emory. And so I watched a lot of neighborhood change that technically should have been illegal. It didn't follow like the guidelines the city had for city planning. And so it became very interesting to me, and I started to research that. Beyond that, I then needed just more research experience. So after I completed that project, I applied to the Leadership Alliance. My friend had previously done it and had gone to Chicago and really enjoyed the program. And so I applied, I got accepted to Columbia, which made me very happy. And I got to work with Dr. James Chu, who's pretty prolific for his work on status, on class, on mobility, and on these different processes that I was interested in. But working with him, we actually didn't focus that much that summer on a research project because he knew I had research experience. He actually helped me develop my proposal and my materials to apply to grad school. And I think that meant the world to me, honestly. I think that was probably the most beneficial experience, was having an actual professor and someone who had been there and was not even from my home institution, so they didn't know me and weren't going to coddle me, really helped me sharpen up my materials. So all of that led me to then apply to PhD programs straight out of undergrad. I applied to six. I chose Emory, and this is where I ended up. And I'm very happy. I just completed my third year, and I'm now a candidate.
Yay. Congrats. Big step. And yeah, it's great. It sounds like you got some really effective mentorship along the way that helped propel you to where you are today. Thank you. Alrighty. So let's dive into our student questions. So oftentimes, or sometimes, we may talk about how our identity may be a disadvantage in higher ed, but in what ways has your identity or your lived experience supported you throughout your educational journey and now in graduate school? Lewis, do you want to get us started, please?
Yeah. Um, so I was born in the Dominican Republic, and I grew up before moving to New York in a small city where you know every neighbor, you know everybody who lives around you. And moving into grad school can be like a very isolating process. It's kind of hard because you're not starting undergrad and you're not doing orientation in the same way that you do in like high school and in undergrad. Everybody's kind of a grown up. So it's really hard to go back into a setting where you have to make friends in that format again. And I think my lived experiences kind of guided me to build the community as soon as I got to Brown for graduate school, because I knew it was gonna take a little bit more than like my coping and my coping like mechanisms and my hobbies. Um, It also reminds me to center myself around things that matter to me and not like what everybody around me wants me to do. And yeah, I kind of feel like my lived experiences ground me in a way that I am reminded of the things that I actually want to do, the things that matter to me, which is to um, support my people and also like rely on them.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Stick to what your values and finding community also. I hear that from a lot of our speakers that that really is what helped propel them through grad school. Okay, I'm going to be quiet. Imani.
I would say similar. I think with my parents, they were very involved with, I guess, well, both my parents were in STEM. My dad was an engineer, and then my mom, she was a polymer chemist. So they both were able to like could put together their resources, but they were like also able to they were just involved with a lot of stuff in our surrounding community with getting students involved in STEM, like holding workshops and like going to schools and stuff like that. And so it was because I was exposed to that environment. And then during my high school program where I had my mentor and I was able to kind of see everybody's involvement in ensuring that these students succeed, it kind of inspired me to want to do that for other students because I knew I had a very, very unique experience. And so I don't think that that should be a rare thing and that having those opportunities. And so that's kind of what kind of carried me throughout. Like when I went to undergrad and like volunteered and mentored students and I was kind of learning things for the sake of like just so I can pass it on. That was always like a weird driver, if you will. So that's kind of one of the things that motivates me and like pushes me to be in these spaces.
Thank you. Wow. Like your immersion was much greater than I thought with, in addition to high school, having two parents in STEM. Great. Okay. So I guess this is a little bit of a tougher question, but an important one. Looking back at your journey through like your undergrad and Leadership Alliance experience, and now in your current PhD program, what's the most valuable lesson that you feel like you've learned so far from like maybe, I don't want to say setback, but from a challenge that ultimately really helped you uh, to grow in grad school? Lewis?
I think for me, what I learned from Leadership Alliance was the importance of building a network in academia and how much like professors are accessible. So when I did Leadership Alliance at Brown, um, Kristen, who's the program administrator for the brain science cohort, pushed me to like reach out to faculty. I had mentioned to her that I was going to apply to grad school that year, and she pushed me to connect with PIs who I thought I would want to work with. And I think Leadership Alliance allows you to go to these universities that you would consider applying to if you're going to do your PhD or any form of um, like graduate education. And I think that I wouldn't have been able to do that hadn't Leadership Alliance exposed me to the community at Brown. And I think it was also like the ability to know that I could do this full time. When I was working in my lab at Hunter, I only had time to do it part time, and that's what I had funding for. And the summer programs allowed me to fully immerse myself into a full time job, doing research, doing something that I was interested in. Also, exploring if I was interested in doing the things that I'm doing that summer. Like I mentioned in my introduction, I did research in different fields. And I think that was a strength to me applying to grad school because I knew what I wanted to go to do after. I could say in my applications, I've done the molecular animal work, I've done the human, and I want to be at the intersection of both in this specific way. And I bring the tools that allow me to do that. I don't think I could have done that had I not done summer programs in like different subfields of neuroscience.
Great, thank you. Imani?
This was for,
For
sorry,
yeah,
I didn't
so
remember the question
that's
again.
okay. No, that's okay. A valuable lesson that you learned during grad school that like helped you to find your fit or your groove, so to speak.
Yeah, I think this is still a lesson that I'm still applying or like trying to practice is like not being afraid to be stupid. And I mean that in the sense of like not being intimidated because I feel like a lot of these spaces we're in when we come to these types of programs is like, oh, they're gonna know more than me and they're gonna think I'm dumb and blah 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 blah. I shouldn't ask this or something like that. And one of the things that I've had to force myself to do is kind of sit in that space of being quote unquote stupid or at least feeling like I'm dumb because then that opens the door for you to get the actual knowledge that you don't have. And so when you're in the spaces where everybody knows everything and you don't, that's when you can absorb as much information as possible and that allows you to grow. And I think it was just it took a long time to kind of get over that fear of like being in a space where you feel like you may not belong as much and you're like, well, I want to be able to like get as much as I can from being in this environment, but you can't get that unless you expose yourself to that feeling and put yourself in that growth mindset. So that's a lesson that I think has carried me.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big one, learning to be a bit vulnerable and in order to grow. Yeah, thank you. Caleb, a
Yeah.
lesson learned.
Yeah, this is one that I'd also say I'm still kind of learning. And I think when you're an academic, you kind of are forced to keep learning this one is that rejection is everywhere, but it's not personal. And that's something that I really struggled with, especially if you're someone who's like a perfectionist or you really feel like you invest your all into your work to put your work up for evaluation and then have people tell you maybe no, they're not interested or no, they don't buy your arguments or no, they don't want to fund your project. Those things can be very difficult to hear, but they're also I think very connected to growth. So I'd say like the biggest example is like my third year, well, my second year in the program, I applied to the American Sociological Association conference, and I didn't apply to any like roundtables or student panels. I wanted to be on these really big panels about culture and about social psychology that were like right up my alley. I thought I was going to get everyone to be like, oh, he's so amazing. Got rejected from all three of them. But one of the people who rejected me from the panel sent me this very long feedback, and they were like, I actually really, really like this paper. Here's what I think you can improve on. And in fact, I took that back and brought it to my advisor, and we ended up reworking the paper to where now it's a completely different paper. It has a much stronger theoretical argument. We collected way more data. The analysis is stronger, and now it's under submission at a top sociology journal. So, but that's not a thing that would have been possible if I had just gotten the acceptance and had been told yes the first time. So you kind of have to learn to hear no, and that to learn that every opportunity isn't for you because there will be ones that are for you. Like now I'll be presenting at ASA this year. It's in a much better city. The person who's presiding over this session is the person who's now going to be my outside committee member. So all those things are possible from rejection. It's just redirection, and you have to kind of treat it that way.
I love that. Last summer, one of our scholars said that rejection is redirection, and I've never forgotten that. Thank you. So we've gotten a ton of questions about crafting the personal statement for the graduate school application. Um, and it may be a while back for you. I don't think I would have remembered what I wrote in my essay in my third year of grad school, but that's okay. Um, so how did you find the stories that you put into your personal statement that you felt would set you apart? What do you feel? What do you do if you feel like everybody else and you can't think of anything that makes you stand out? I guess that's the gist of the question. Lewis.
I think I I had to go back to this. So I provided my previous statements to a current mentee, and I opened that folder. The summer that I was at Brown, when I decided to apply to grad school, I made a Google Drive folder called "You Are Getting Into Grad School," where I threw everything related to my applications in there. And the process itself, of deciding where I wanted to go is something that I took in a very empirical approach. I like made a list based on locations, made a list of some programs that had faculty that I wanted to work with. The hardest part was writing the first paragraph of my personal statement, because that's a hook. There's a very specific formula for the personal statement that I learned through my research fellowships, including Leadership Alliance, where it's like there's a way to write a personal statement. Um, it's like a first paragraph that gives a quick synopsis of everything about you, or something that should catch the committee's interest of the app for like on the applicant. I wrote everything at the bottom, which is a description of my research projects that I had conducted, and that was done. The last paragraph is what would I do if I were to go into the graduate program. That part of the statement was hard because you have to tailor it for a specific program, and it looked different for all 7 schools I ended up applying to. Now, the first paragraph was really hard because I had to tell something about myself, and it couldn't be everything about me, but I had to summarize it really well and tie a story together to my research interest. And because I feel like I wasn't born into like knowing what graduate school would be and like what these statements were, took a lot of back and forth with my mentor. So I worked on it with my PI, and I'm so lucky that we went through 20 revisions of my first paragraph of my personal statement. And it went through iterations. I told many stories. And the main thing, it was like, how do I tell you that I'm interested in this because of my personal story, but I don't have to spend the full paragraph telling you the full story? And something that stood out to me is to show, not tell. And I think once I understood what that meant, my statement became better. But yeah, the first paragraph was the hardest thing for me. The rest was very follow formula, say things right.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very comforting. Well, I'm guessing to a lot of students to hear you did 20 drafts. Imani, do you have anything to add to that question? Or I can jump into the next.
Yeah, well, I'll say one of the things that I've seen from personal statements, I've at least sat on the committees of like for the
Oh,
genetics program and at least for our summer undergraduate program. And like the things that I've seen stick out as a reviewer, it's it's never one thing that will be like, oh, this will be the thing that will stick out and like get you in to the program. It's more of like tapping into kind of like what we were saying before, your values and like what are the things that are personal to you, but also are applicable to like whatever you're trying to do in grad school. Because a lot of people, I know, especially in like biomedical sciences, people talk about like, oh, if they had personal experience with illness or like family members with illness, or just like something that you're connected to. Like I think of Caleb in sociology. So there's something that you're connected to in society. We all live in a society. So something that is deeply connected to who you are and how you want to contribute to that in whatever field that is. That's essentially what you want to bring across in your personal statement. And one of the things that connected to your personal statement that you're not necessarily writing as letters of rec, where you provide your whatever your draft is to the people writing your letters of rec and making that a cohesive story. So it's like this is your story from your perspective. This is your story from other people's perspective and why they're vouching for you. All of that can connect into a more like cohesive and strong application. So that's all I want to add.
that's great advice. Yeah, sharing that personal statement with your recommenders. I should have done that. Anyway, here we are. Um, Caleb, so you're coming from it. I know when you apply in social sciences, you do a personal statement. I know in humanities it's more like a writing portfolio. Um, but what do you, coming from the sociology lens, think that students can do to make their essays stand out or stand apart?
Yeah, this is similarly to Imani. I've sat recently on the admissions committee for the PhD program. So seeing what recently came through, I would say for social science, there actually and this is very frustrating here, I know no one wants to hear this, is that there is no formula. Because if you think about it, everyone, I mean, in sociology, everyone has some connection to society. People usually tell some story about either some experience with an institution, with education, with gender or racialization. And then from that, they tell the story. So that kind of becomes, I don't want to discount it, but it becomes a little bit moot. So what ends up I've noticed sticking out is being able to take that experience and explain what that means for the field. And this is where I would really recommend talking to your advisors and your mentees, these people who currently publish and write in these fields, because sociology is really a discipline that operates sort of off of these trends, and that's trends in methodologies, trends in theory. And you kind of need to be able to see what the field is interested in. So at the time that I applied to grad school, everyone was really interested in ethnography and qualitative methods and community-based research. But in the current environment we're in right now, everyone's really interested in AI and big data and quantification. And so being able to know that even if that wasn't my story, so now when I apply stuff, I say like, I don't do heavy quant work. That's just not what I do. But what I say is that this work can complement what is currently being done that's popular. So even if what you do, maybe if you think like what you do is like looked down upon, if you do the method that's not popular, if you're in the subsection that's small at the conference, being able to leverage that and say that because so few people do this, I'm able to provide a unique insight, or I can provide a unique lens or unique methodological approach. Those things can really strengthen it. And those can be enhanced by your lived experience by saying, like, I do ethnography. I'm able to access communities that people in my department can't access for cultural research because they're not part of those groups. I knew these people before I ever became a researcher. So leveraging your real experience can be a benefit in terms of the types of data you can access, in terms of the types of communities you can relate to, the types of people you can help with your research. So just think about and discuss those things, not just with your advisors, but also your friends, your colleagues, like not even your friends who also want to go to grad school, but just people in general, like how they think about your work and the way you talk about it. And those things really, I have found, tend to be the things that produce the strongest personal statements, at least in social science.
That's great advice. Yeah. Knowing the current, interests and trends in the field is really helpful. And so along those lines, we got a question that says, a lot of people say that using your own personal stories and struggles in personal statements or essays feels like sympathy hunting in order to get a better chance. So how do you effectively weave your personal story into a statement while sounding authentic, but still highlighting any struggles that you've overcome? And I'll let any of you jump in on this instead of the round robin. This is a hard one.
I think, okay, I would argue it's about figuring out how much of it is relevant. So in my personal statement, I talked about my major research project in undergrad, which was the gentrification project. But my personal experience in that, I start kind of that hook Louise talked about, is that like I was not from a major city. I was from a very rural area. So I was unsure if this was just, I thought this was just how cities worked. I was like, there's just always construction, there's always development. And it wasn't until I was speaking to people who were from cities like Philadelphia and New York and from LA who were like, no, my hometown does not look like this. Like, there's not always this construction happening. That made me realize, oh, this is a question worth pursuing. So there were a lot of other parts of my life I could have talked about, like struggles with income inequality and housing in Arkansas and stuff, but it wasn't really relevant to my research, and it wasn't relevant to the story I was trying to sell to the committee, which was that I had this interest in urban sociology that came from not being from an urban area. And so because I didn't have this personal connection, it actually meant that I was able to see things slightly more objectively, or like trying to leverage things in that way, because I get what the question is kind of about, like the sympathy hunting. You don't have to air your dirty laundry for the committee to want to bring you here. It's just think about like how relevant is it to what you're telling them about yourself or about your values or about what you want.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think similar to Caleb, one of the things that made my first paragraph hard to write is figuring out if the stories that I was telling was relevant to describe my research interests. Part of it is like my statement was written around the fact that stressful experiences can influence the decisions that you make, and that we understand very little about how the brain encodes those stressful experiences to guide that behavior. had to inform to the committee at some point in the statement that I went through a stressful situation, but I also didn't want to tell them that much. Um, and which of the situations I would describe also took a little bit. So it's like doing a lot of introspection and figuring out what makes, what guides your story and what makes sense. And you don't have to overshare. You actually should feel like comfortable with the fact that you're sharing that, and that it adds strength to your story.
Thank you. Okay. Any other advice on personal statements? I like that, like the finding your why. I think that's important for sure. Um, and then it's so great that you've gotten to sit on review committees so that you've experienced what really stands out. That's really helpful. Okay, so it's crazy that we only have about 20 minutes left, but I want to transition to talking about transitions. So, let's see, Imani, what was the biggest challenge that you faced transitioning from undergraduate research to grad school? And how did your lived experiences help you overcome that?
I would say I've had various experiences because I feel like most of the stuff that I was doing in undergrad, there was projects where I was doing research on campus with my professor. So this wasn't work I was doing during the summer. It was throughout the school year, and most of it was because I was at a smaller institution, and we weren't like an R1 institution. I don't know what we were considered, but essentially the research that was being done, if it wasn't done by a professor or the undergrads after their classes, it wasn't getting done. There weren't any, actually, there were a couple master's students, but we didn't have any PhD students. Like there weren't any long-term people who were there or like postdocs. We didn't have any of those or at least while I was at the department. And so it was definitely a shift even when I went to the summer research programs because I went to these places like Stanford or Harvard for their summer research programs, and they had like postdocs and grad students, and I was like I didn't fully understand the culture of how labs were. And even when I was doing those programs, the program that I did at Stanford was virtual, so I wasn't there. And then the one that I did at Harvard was smaller. And so it was like I was just interfacing with the grad student, and the PI was there for lab meetings. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is how it is. But then when I finally started school and I did my first few rotations, it was very much like various different environments. One where I didn't really see the PI very much, and I don't know, I saw her maybe once a month. So like I didn't know that this was a thing that could be done. So I was like, oh, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. I was paired with a mentor, but then they were also like doing their own thing, and like I just had to figure out what I was doing in that lab. I didn't end up joining that lab, but then there were other rotations where I didn't even rotate in this lab, but one lab where it just didn't seem like a good environment, like the way that people got along. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that this is how people function, where it didn't feel like constructive criticism and it was just criticism. And I was like, oh, okay. And then when I came to the lab that I'm in, and it felt more structured, where it was like, okay, you'll see the PI, she is there. And then there's postdocs and grad students who help to mentor the incoming, either whether they're undergrads in the lab or when there's like first year grad students in the lab rotating, you kind of have more structure. And that's what I gravitated towards because I'm used to more one-on-one like or at least closer mentorship like I had at my other institute or at my undergrad institution. And so it was kind of a transition trying to get used to the different types of styles and what I actually gravitated towards, which was more familiarity, if anything. Um, just because it can be overwhelming with the number of labs and the different mentorship styles and stuff like that. So it took some time to get used to, but I feel like once I joined a lab, then I felt more settled. So, yeah.
So you didn't join a lab right away.
No, we had to do 3 rotations, and then by like the summer or at the end of the spring quarter, we would join a lab officially.
And not every program does that. That's a great
Yeah.
way to explore your research
Yeah,
interest.
some are direct admit, which there's pros and cons. So
Ah,
it's
okay.
a
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Caleb, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced during that transition?
Yeah, I'll say so. One of the big challenges, and I think this is in part really relevant for people who do programs like Leadership Alliance or like Mellon, is that they kind of fast track you sort of early in your undergrad experience to think about going to grad school, which means that a lot of people who did this program alongside me either went straight through or in the next 2 years. But that also meant that we were actually really, really young when you think about like how old graduate students tend to be, especially because in social sciences, you're often not required to have a master's first. You can go through and they'll provide the master's en route. And so when I entered my program, it was a cohort of 6. All of my cohort members were 25 plus. I was 21 at the time. And so that combined with the fact that I had been in these programs that were really invested in doing research and knowing that, like, when you write your statements for things like Leadership Alliance and like Melanie, you have to say, oh, I think I want to be a researcher. I want to learn if I want to be a professor, like those types of things. And then you get to grad school, and there were people who simply were not there for that. They don't come necessarily, they didn't like teaching aspects. Some of them liked research, but they didn't like the research they were working on. And then also in social science, we don't have PIs. We tend to just have, there's just faculty generally in the department, and you choose to collaborate with some of them. Some of them may invite you to work on projects, some of them may not. So some people have like uneven levels of mentorship, but these were all things that I had no clue about. And I sort of assumed that everyone would enter the program, get the same treatment, and that we would all approach research and classes the same way. And that was another thing, is that coming straight from undergrad meant that doing the coursework was really easy for me, especially in terms of like these discussion-based lectures, but it also made it sort of frustrating when I had these cohort members, and I love these people, but they had just come back from corporate. They were not interested in doing what they saw as like undergraduate style work. They wanted to do research, but they didn't want to do coursework necessarily. And so understanding that we were all there with different values, with different purposes. Some of these people had partners, they had children, they had other things that were like of interest to them. Some of them wanted to go back to industry with their PhDs, some wanted to stay in academia. These were all just things I just didn't know because I was just sort of young and naive about research and about the graduate school process. So I think that was a really big challenge for me, was sort of finding my community, because I assumed it would just come from the fact that you had a cohort, like these people enter the same year as you, we're all going to be friends. But I mean, that wasn't realistic. And so it took me really going to other departments, going to talks on campus, going to different departmental events, and meeting people who were interested in approaching graduate school in the same way as me. And that was a real struggle. I feel like it took about a year and a half to really get comfortable and find those people in the department. But once I did, I feel like the quality of the experience just improved overnight by 100%.
That's great. Yep. Finding your community and going out of your comfort zone and what you know, like what struck me about what Caleb said is that he, went to other departments. I don't know if I would have been brave enough to have done that back then, but anyway. I also didn't get to do Leadership Alliance. Lewis, you have a little bit of a different perspective because you did your summer research at Brown. And so you knew people there already. So what was the biggest challenge you think you faced when you were transitioning from undergrad to grad school?
I think that doing Leadership Alliance at Brown really helped me have a network to come back to. And most of the people who I had befriended and connected with were like early year graduate students who are now like upper years in my program. And having that made it an easy transition getting into the department. Now, there are parts of grad school that I anticipated, but were like really hard to deal with. Moving out of your like city to come to grad school at a different place is really expensive. And not every grad school gives you money to move. Brown does. I was lucky that I got accepted to Brown and that here we get a moving stipend. That's still not enough. My laptop decided to die on me first month of grad school, and that's a really big expense. But like I went through every resource that I had and was lucky to receive a scholarship from the Científico Latino Network, and that like allowed me to pay for things. As a first year grad student, things are really expensive. The other part, I think I resonate with Caleb a lot in coming with experience from these like these programs that are built in building community. And coming to grad school and being the youngest person in the cohort and kind of being reminded of that at every step. Um, and that to this day is a little bit hard. It's a like culture of being the youngest person in a space where like some people tend to be a bit not that older than me, but that's one of the challenges I guess that has come. And the way that I've dealt with it is building my community outside of that.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
So even though you were going somewhere where you felt comfortable, there's still
Yeah.
that transition. Yeah. Okay. So what do you think, or was there anything that surprised you positively or negatively when you first started out as a grad student, Imani?
You said, was there anything that was positive or negative?
Surprised you, yeah, that was positive or negative.
I think I was surprised by just how, well, I wasn't, this is one thing that I was looking for when I was looking for grad school was like collaboration, because one thing that I figured is that like it's easier to learn a lot more when you kind of branch out to people, like whether it's like different labs on campus or even different labs across the country, apparently. So like I that's one thing I've learned that I appreciate in science. And I knew with my PI this was a big thing because she's had a lot of collaborators all over for many years. And so being able to have the opportunity to talk to people from around the world about whatever we're studying, well, it depends on the topic of that time, but I've mostly we do like bacterial biology, so talking about like, oh, what is this mechanism in this and blah blah blah. So like we're talking about this and it's some expert in Germany or like, and it's very cool to be in that kind of environment where you, even though you're from very far apart, uh you could still find that commonality in this very specific nerdy thing that you like to study. And so I think I was just surprised at how welcoming everybody is, and it's motivating to keep working in that regard because it's not like you're discouraged too, and it's not like they kind of shield themselves off. I know it's always field dependent on like how competitive people are, but I know at least within our niche, we've been able to collaborate a lot, and it's made things very cool. And I don't know if it's just, I think it's one of those perks of being at like those big institutions because they have like resources to do that. But I know, and I know Leadership Alliance is like a network of all these kinds of big institutions, so that's kind of nice to be around that.
Caleb, was there anything that surprised you?
Yes, this one's kind of a double-edged sword. I feel like sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. Is that when you transition from undergrad to graduate research, there's this sort of expectation that you're not really a student anymore. You are expert in training, as my mentor loves to tell me, or as she likes to say, you are now the expert because you are researching something that information doesn't exist for at times, especially as you get closer to your dissertation work and you start doing more and more novel work. There's less and less resources to fall back on in terms of other people's work to cite. And so sometimes there will be times where I'll come to my advisor with a question. I'll be like, I don't know how you measure this thing methodologically. And she'll be like, well, no one's ever measured it. So that's your job to figure out, which is not always great. But then on the positive side is that the first conference I went to when I first presented, you could really feel this sort of difference where people are sort of taking your ideas more seriously. People are willing to engage them. They're willing to give you more chances to prove yourself, I feel like, as a graduate student. So I think that was the thing that I really enjoyed was coming here and being able for people to just be like, oh, that's not just your undergrad research, like it's just your hobby on campus. You know how your friends are when you don't do research. They're like your little thing you do with the professors. You're able to talk with people and like these people whose work you really take seriously and look up to and have them be able to look at you and be like, I really enjoyed that presentation. I think that was something that has really inspired me and honestly keeps me coming back to academia is that you really get that professionalization and that treatment that like your work is serious and that there are people who care about the things you're interested in talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I do want to get to some of the questions that have been submitted. Did any of you take a gap year? I don't think so, right? Okay. Um, all righty. So there's a couple of questions actually about figuring out what your research interests are, or what you want to pursue in terms of research. Do you have any advice or any suggestions to help somebody figure out that before they start applying to grad school? And, not necessarily having a research opportunity because you may be, about to graduate or not, have had the opportunity to do that. Lewis?
Something that helped me decide my interest outside of pursuing research with the fellowships that I was in was connecting with faculty at my institution and here at Brandon at University of Michigan, not necessarily to like join their labs, but to like hear about the things that they wanted to do. Something that was a big shock to me is how many things we research and the fact that I had to narrow things down to a specific niche. Like I remember when I started doing research, I think that that took me a lot during my last year of undergrad. Just be like, how do I narrow things down? Because I had spoken to so many people about their research, and I had read some of the papers. Some like faculty will give talks at different schools. I would like watch some of those, um, and so it's a lot of it came from like conversations and understanding what is out there, and then also understanding limitations and the benefit of certain techniques. Um, so I would recommend to anybody who is unclear about their research interest to connect with faculty and even grad students. You don't necessarily have to meet with a PI, but if you're like in your summer programs, talk to the grad students who are in your departments right now and ask them how they like what their journey was. Because where I ended up now doing research for my PhD is also very different from what I applied in my personal statement. And all of that came from exploring and in conversations.
That's good to hear. So you don't necessarily need to know exactly what you want to study when you're
That may
applying.
be specific for like rotational programs like Imani mentioned. So my program's rotation, and I got to do three rotations in three different labs before I committed to working with a PI and joining their lab permanently. And there are pros and cons to direct admit versus rotation, but I chose to do a rotation program because I knew I would probably change my mind when I started grad school.
Great. Imani, do you have any advice or recommendations for exploring your interests outside of an undergrad research experience?
Yeah, I would say even when I wasn't rotating in specific labs, I mentioned the one lab where I sat in on lab meetings. You can do that if you just talk to faculty that you're like, oh, I heard a talk. I love to see the type of work, like other work that they're doing in their lab. And you can find, like, even if you don't necessarily work in their lab, you can collaborate with them and be like, hey, I know you learned this, you developed this tool or whatever it is that you're like, they're good at. And you're like, I want to be able to implement this in my work. Is it possible that we could like sit down and figure out how to implement this with my data or whatever? That's something that you can do with just being around and also exploring that, even though it's not something that you may not, as I said, you may not be in that lab, but it's something that you can utilize to enhance your own work, or just explore your interest in that topic. And for your PhD, you usually have a thesis committee, and so you usually have different faculty that you can have and who contribute different aspects or perspectives to your specific project. And so these are people that you can have on your committee, depending on like the departmental rules. They'd be like, oh, it has to be somebody within the program, or there's different rules depending on the program, but you can still collaborate with those people regardless. Um, and so that's one way to explore. Another way is, dang, I had it and now I lost it. If it comes back, I'll say, but I think that's one of the bigger ones with exploring your research interests.
Thank you. Caleb, what about in sociology? What would you recommend outside of STEM?
Yeah, I feel like for us, and this is a thing I honestly wish I'd done. So we have subsections. It's like in sociology at the ASA, there are subsections, and you can go online to the ASA website and they list the subsections. For almost every department you will find, faculty list their research interest along the lines of those subsections. And I think something that everyone has said kind of before is that you don't need to know, because what I applied and said I was going to do to Emory, thank God I'm not bound to that. That is not the project I want to do. I'm not interested in those methods. I don't want to ask those questions. But they are similar to the sort of values I talked about in terms of what I valued in research and the sort of questions I wanted to ask. So I would, one, look at those substantive areas. So there are things like race and ethnicity, there's health, there's the substance abuse section, there's like um gender and sex. There's all these different subsections. Those will tell you substantively. Then I think people should think about their interest in terms of methods, because sociology departments tend to be divided up methodologically. So certain departments, like if you go to Northwestern, everyone knows that you will probably do some type of qualitative analysis, and it'll be like a very big project. Berkeley is very well known for its historical work. UCLA is known for like digital analysis of like social media materials and these other different types of content. So thinking substantively about the courses you're interested that you've taken in, like what are the topic areas that you are actually interested in researching, but then also the methods. So how are you interested in studying those questions? And I think once you do those two things, you kind of just pick something out of there, because now I'm notorious in my department for having too many research interest areas. Like my page looks crazy. But when I apply for stuff, and this goes to those statements we talked about earlier, telling a cohesive story, I'm able to say, well, I did all of these different things, and now because of that, I'm interested in this project that combines these different elements of them. And that's why now say I study everyday life and identity and culture. That's the mix of like five different projects that none of them were even mildly related. But thinking about how to sell your story and thinking about the ways that the different experiences influence you will really help you pick your research interest areas.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, we have 2 minutes left. So with our 2 minutes, what's one piece of advice that you would offer to prospective graduate students, or like what's one thing that you learned that you wish you had known when you first started out? And we'll start with Lewis.
I would say connect with people in the schools that you are thinking of applying to, even if you're like in the early stages. Something that I did, I only applied to schools where I had friends in. Um, Part of that was so that I would go to a place where I knew people. So that was in the 7 schools that I applied to, had friends who had done Leadership Alliance before or were in BP Indoor. And but outside of that, they like connected me with people in labs that I mentioned I was interested in, and those were people that like offered to review my personal statements before applying. And I think that made the process a little bit easier and more comforting, is that I had people in the school supporting me. And grad students are pretty open to helping undergrads get in. I don't think I know any grad student who's a big gatekeeper of the graduate school experience.
Thank you, Lewis. Imani?
I would say go or choose programs that, and this is also within the actual process, like while you're interviewing and stuff like that, but go with programs that you feel that you are actively welcomed and not just tolerated, or like just kind of like, here's a corner we made for you, like that, that kind of thing. Because you're going to be in grad school for a while, like it's a time commitment. And so you want to be in a place where you feel like you can get the help that you need, because they're going to have those ups and downs, and you need that support that can get you, like, help bring you back up when you are in those lower parts of the process. And so I know that's something that's really helped me, whether that's the community building, like going to a school where you know people, or just being in an environment like the city that you want to live in, or like the kind of area that you can see yourself being in for a while, and that it like sparks joy. Because if outside of just being in school, you want to just enjoy life, that's where you want to be able to live. And so you're not just going to be stuck in a lab or writing or whatever, wherever the setting of you doing your research is. So I think that's where all the aspects that go into where you feel welcomed, that's where you want to be.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. You're going to have a life outside of grad school, and you want to be in a place where you're going to be able to pursue your outside interests. Thank you, Imani. Okay, Caleb.
Yeah, my last thing is just search broadly, be genuine, and say yes to opportunities. I think those are three things I kind of wish I did more of. So search broadly in terms of scholarships, funding opportunities, programs. I only applied to six. Probably should have done way more. There are now schools I'm like, oh, I probably would have really liked to go there. But search broadly, be genuine. Just because an opportunity sounds good for other people and everyone else really wants it doesn't mean it's for you. There were grants I applied for that I'm like, thank God I didn't get that fellowship. I would not have wanted to go to like what insert country for a year and do that. Like, but I applied because everyone else in my cohort applied. And then say yes to opportunities. There are so many things that I've gotten just from saying yes, not even to research opportunities, but doing departmental service, being willing to help when undergrads came to visit, saying yes to things like this. I get to meet interesting, cool graduate students and new people. So just saying yes to different opportunities, even if they sound inconvenient. I mean, do with what makes sense. Don't burn yourself out saying yes to everything, but say yes if you can't afford to do it, if you have time to do it, if you can spare to do it, do it. You might be surprised and you'll find so many interesting opportunities that way.
Yeah, like something you might not have thought about doing. I love that. Well, thank you so much to all of you for your time and your insight. And if you're okay with it, I can share your LinkedIn in our Google Classroom so that students can follow up with you because there's so many questions that we didn't get to. And to all of our viewers, please join us again on Monday for another conversation with a doctoral scholar and follow us on social media, the Leadership Alliance. Thanks. Have a great evening, everyone.